All right. Well, hey, one more time, I want to say welcome to 3D. I'm doing this again because I want to invite you to join us and welcome our friends, join us online. Great to have you guys with us again this week. As we continue a series we've entitled From This Day Forward. Real quick, just to give you an update if you're new here, we stole the series title from a book from a pastor friend named Craig Groeschel, and actually the 5 big ideas for a 5-week series came from the book as well. If you read the book, and I would encourage you to if you want to, you'll find that the content there, we've obviously created our own, but we thought the series title and each week of the 5 big ideas were really solid from the standpoint of relationships. And so week 1, we talked about seeking God and the importance of that, and that Jesus is your number 1, and then you become who he wants you to be as you look for your number 2, and then if you're married, you seek the number 1 with your number 2. And we talked about that. Second week was all about fighting fair. How many have been learning how to do that? 3 of you. Okay, we're going to redo that message because it's obviously not working. No, I'm kidding. And then last week we talked about having fun. How many of you are having fun? Now, if you weren't here, you're saying, what do you mean by having fun, Pastor? I'm talking about having fun. In fact, I wanted to title that one, How to Make Lovin' Fun. Now you know what it was really about. So if you weren't here, you can get that online. We're continuing the series today, and I've asked Brian to speak again. Actually, we're team teaching this stuff, and I thought, great subject matter, and I thought, you know what? I'd rather have him speak to that. So, no, I'm kidding. I'm not afraid of speaking to the subject. I just thought in team teaching this would be the way to go. I'm really excited about it. And then we'll wrap this series up next week. So I've just wanted to put something in front of you. We wrap it up next week and finish the series from this day forward. And then 1 month from today is what? Easter. You got it. So I want you to already now be thinking about who you are going to bring with you Easter Sunday. Be thinking about, be praying for them. Just really believe it's an opportunity for us to really connect with those who are maybe close to us that are still far from God. And you're saying, well, what happens between this series that wraps up next week and that one? We're going to do 2 weeks that you will not want to miss either week of. I think it's really going to present some clarity about who we are, what we're about, where we're going, and just answer maybe questions that aren't answered in other environments. But I've said more than enough. I want to give Brian plenty of time today. So I want to encourage you, put your hands together and welcome Brian as he comes to bring God's Word.
Thanks, man. Good job. All right, buddy. Sounds good. Thanks. I noticed that Pastor Keith didn't mention the title of today's talk, Stay Pure. And I don't know if he did that on purpose or not, but a lot of people, when they hear the idea of purity, they kind of like, I won't talk about that. So I appreciate him passing that one to me because I actually am excited about talking about that because there's so much joy and fulfillment that can happen in life when you embrace those things. Well, I am Brian. This is my wife, Joy. We've been married, little Vanna there for you, 13 and a half years. We've enjoyed being part of the 3D leadership team here for the last few weeks, helping us on pastoring and doing those type of things and some teaching. We've had the privilege of having 5 kids. Ben and Josh, yesterday, we had the chance to break out the baseball gloves in the yard, play a little baseball. So nice yesterday, wasn't it? And I was driving home about 12 from a appointment, going home, and boy, I thought, what a day. Go golfing, do something. And we just had a wonderful time. Well, at our house, we live on a little bit of property, and we bat near the house, and then we hit into the field. And we've been there for 2.5 years, and when we first moved to the house, we would play these one-on-one baseball games, Ben versus Josh. They're 10 and 11, 14 months to the day apart, super competitive, a lot of fun. Ben is a freak of nature. He's huge. He's 11 years old, and he's almost as tall as Joy. He's just a giant. He's going to dwarf me. And then Josh is, more of an average-sized kid for his age, but the guy's just stinking athletic. Ben, because of his growth, is a little more gangly and awkward, getting ready to go to the teenage stages. So they play these competitive games, and because of the age difference, but the different kinds of way they're made up, it's a very competitive game every time. So we used to have the home run line, right at the edge of the grass. If they cleared the grass in the field, home run. It's a dinger. Now it's over the trees. You got to hit over the trees. And they're like, Dad, I can't do that. And they're giving me all this whining and stuff. You know, one of the greatest joy of being a dad is just watching your kids grow up and be able to put your fingerprints on them and help them develop in so many cool, amazing ways. And Josh won the game, 13-12. Ben was very disappointed. Had a wonderful time. Then it was time to do our throwing contest because I want to see, who can throw the farthest. Josh always wins. But I noticed something when Ben was out in the field retrieving a ball that Josh hit, the older one, the big one, he just fired that thing. He threw that thing like I've never seen him do it. Then he went back to his bad habits of keeping his elbow tucked in and just kind of short-arming it. He throws it just like my dad did. My dad had a horrible arm. It looked like a lame duck coming off. We won't go into the Peyton Manning wobble. That's not what we're here for today. We're here to encourage people. So anyway, he just had trouble throwing. And then he just got his whole body in that thing and let it go. And all of a sudden, at this moment, I'm like, there's hope. We can get this done. So we went to our throwing contest. And Josh goes, and he just fires it like he always does, basically to the home run line, just fires the ball. Then Ben throws, and it's short again. I'm like, Ben, buddy, I like to focus on what you're supposed to do right, but I'm telling you right now, you got to get your elbow away from your body because he throws like this. And I said, Ben, what are you doing? I didn't say that. That was Pastor Keith. Throws like a girl. I didn't say that. You can go talk to him after church. And so he takes it and just and I'm like, Ben, you're huge. Throw the stinking ball. So finally, he goes over there, and I said, just get real mad and just let it go. Just get the arm out there. And boy, 20 feet past Josh's. First time in his life, he outthrew his brother. I was so proud of him. I was so excited. Josh is like, oh, we need to do it again. So he grabs the ball, he throws it, and he must have threw the ball 20 more times, but nothing could get to where Ben threw it. There was such a great moment as a father of watching my son Ben, who's one of the most tender-hearted, kind boys, fill his face with joy that he beat his stinking, athletic, competitive little brother for the first time or something in sports. It was a great moment. The heart of God towards us is that of a father towards a child. There's too many times when we talk about hard subjects that we want to, we don't spend time to set up the heart of God. The heart of God is one of compassion, great expectations, dreams, hopes, and wishes. Just as I want everything good for each one of my kids, your father is a good father, and the same is true for you. But just like I had to tell Ben finally something negative to help him achieve something positive, I had to deal with that with his elbow. And for the first time in his life, he had breakthrough in an area that he's never experienced his whole life. We've probably thrown the ball together hundreds of times. And it wasn't until yesterday he finally got the victory over it. You see, when God writes about hard stuff in Scripture, he's not writing about it because he's mad at you, he's upset with you. He's writing it to you because he wants to get you free from something that's keeping you from your potential. So with that in mind, let's look at a passage of Scripture today. And when you're dealing with purity, I just figured let's just go to the hard texts and let's see what our good Father has for us today, whether it's hard to read or not. In Ephesians chapter 4, in verses 1 through 3, the Apostle Paul talked about a guy who had screwed up in so many arenas of his life, that God had restored, had purified his soul to offer life to others once again. You see, when we're talking about purity today, please don't just go to the bedroom. Don't just go to the sexual sins. Go to all relationships, because we need purity in all relationships. No contamination. So anything impure is contamination. So we want God to remove the contaminants so we can experience the fullness of his purity. So in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 3, he says this, "Therefore I, a prisoner for serving the Lord," he says, "I am chained to the one who set me free." Said this, "I beg of you to lead a life worthy of your calling." What a beautiful call. What a beautiful place to start for us to aspire to. In my understanding of that, if I were to teach my boys that, I'd say, I want you to live up to your name, Densmore. Because Densmore means something to me, and it needs to mean something to you. Stuff like if you give somebody your word, you follow it through, even if it costs you a great risk. You do what you say. Your yes is yes, your no is no. You're a gentleman to the ladies. You're kind. You're benevolent. You work hard. You see things through. If you're in that competition with your brother, you play it out and you leave it all on the field. You go all in because that's who we are. That's what Paul is calling us to do. He's setting the table to say, this is who you are as God's kids because you carry the name of Christ. You are a Christian. Therefore, this is what I call you to because this is who you are. So act like it. That's the idea. Notice what he says. You have been called by God. What a great call that is. For someone to become a child of God, the God of heaven has to reach down and grab their soul and call them to himself. And when we receive that call, we are stricken with a choice. Am I going to receive that great invitation or am I going to resist? But every single one of us who are a child of God has been called by the Almighty One. He knows you by name, and he reached down from the window of heaven, who created your soul and fashioned it and snatched it. But it's our choice to receive his hand. So for those of us who have, we have therefore become images of Christ. In the name of Christ, we bear his name and reputation. So we live like it. So this is what he says. Always be humble and gentle. Well, if Brian was writing this and not God through the inspiration of the Spirit or Paul through the inspiration of the Spirit, I probably would have wrote, strive to be humble and gentle. Because I'm not sure if I really like that word always. Boy, it got really quiet all of a sudden. Maybe because that rings a little too true. Always be humble and gentle. But he goes further. He says, be patient with each other. Make allowance for each other's faults because of your love. In other words, if you're in any type of relationship, business, marriage, with your children, guess what? They're going to hurt you. So make some margin for some wounds. And I love this little idea about wounds. And guys, every single person who's been here today that's breathing air, you've been wounded. But we must not become the ones who are more upset at the person who wounds us, but what are we going to do with the wounds inside of us? In other words, guys, we're in this pandemic in our country of shootings right now, and there was more officers shot this last few days. And there's going to be some real issues of those people having to work through it in their mind and their psyche and in their soul. And when that person shoots the gun, they're not responsible for the fact that they were shot, but they are responsible to get the bullet out and get healed. So what God's calling us today is to identify those wounds that possibly are self-inflicted or have been caused to us. And let's get some bullets out today and let's heal. Because that's who God is. That's what he can offer you today. So make some margin for some others' faults. It's going to happen. Make every effort to keep yourselves united, bonded, glued in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. And then he goes to chapter 5, which is right after what he just said, after he called us to this high calling of living. He says, imitate God. How are you doing with that today? Therefore, in everything you do, why? Because you're his dear children. Do you guys, fathers, do you ever get a little chuckle with your boys or your daughters when they start doing a mannerism that you have? So Ben has my temperament, but Josh has a lot more of my personality. They're different in those arenas. And when I see Ben exhibit traits of my temperament, it's an amazing thing watching. But when Josh demonstrates my personality, which is very outside, and how he works with people and moves through life is very similar to me, I say, Lord, help him. Live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. Now let's get some understanding on love. He's not talking about have a feeling of love. He says make a choice to put the needs of others ahead of your own. That's love. I'm going to make choices for their benefit rather than my own. He loved us because that's what God did. He put our needs ahead of his own, our wishes, our desires ahead of his own. Offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God. So in other words, God said, I'm going to put your needs above my own, and I'm going to sacrifice myself for your benefit. Which to God was a pleasing aroma. Oh, it pleased him to death. Then he gets into some of the stuff that he says, this is not who we are. This is not in the nature of us who are in God's family. This is not who we are. Let there be no sexual immorality, impurity, or greed among you. Such sins have no place among God's people. Obscene stories, foolish talk, and coarse jokes, these are not for you. Instead, let there be thankfulness to God. In other words, don't look at things outside of what God has given you. Be thankful for what he has given you. In a marriage relationship, be thankful for the partner that God has blessed you with, not what he hasn't blessed you with. You can be sure that no immoral, impure, or greedy person will inherit the kingdom of Christ and of God. For a greedy person is an idolater, worshiping the things of this world. He said, don't be fooled by those who try to excuse these sins, for the anger of God will fall on all who disobey him. Don't participate in the things these people do. For once you were full of darkness. This, in other words, this is who you used to be. But since you've become my child, this is not who you are anymore. But now you have light from the Lord. So, live as people of light. This is one thing I don't understand about some ministries in people who take the name and the badge of Christ, is they want to curse the darkness more than praise the light. They want to focus on who we are or aren't rather than who we are. And if God's clear here about that we're children of light, then we should run to the light and be thankful for those things and not worry about just cursing what we aren't. Because it doesn't matter. Because you're not that anymore. So learn who you are and grow that way. What verse am I on? Oh, there we go. Verse 9. For this light within you produces only what is good and right and true. Parents, with your kids, isn't that what you wish for your children? Only what is good, right, and true? Let's just unpack that for a second. With our kids, we have great things in store for them. We have worst fears that we wish that would never happen to them. Just a little personal note. In my study this week, and my study partner is Joy, and I always bounce a lot of my ideas off her, and she has a lot of input on how to explain these things as we do life together. And as I was unpacking this, I had a phrase, and I said, honey, I want you to describe parents' best wishes for our kids. And so we went down that path and about good and, find a great soulmate and be healthy and strong, all those good, warm things. And then I said, well, let's describe some of parents' worst fears. And I said, honey, what are some of your worst fears? Without hesitation, not being sarcastic or belittling, she said, well, honey, we've already lived most of those. And I had to go from my sanctuary of study and preparation for this back to reality. I'm like, you're right. What are some of the worst fears? I know when you have a child born, one of your greatest fears is that they're sickly. or they don't make it. Well, we had both. Those who have built troubles learning and growing and things don't come easy to them. Yeah, Benjamin is severe dyslexic. We've had to go through tons and tons and tons of outside world stuff to help him with inner eye muscles and dyslexia and all these things. We have a child who's got special needs, and every day we have to manage that and walk with that and just manage her whole world. Same disease as her sister. And so I'm reading this, and I thought that, but here's what God can do. And I want to say that to understand what the healing he does. Frankly, in that moment when I asked that question, I was at the place where I was ready to look over the horizon again to face new fears. That God had done enough healing in my heart where I was from my perspective. I believe in Joy's too, that we weren't looking over that horizon with pain and through tears, but through hope and expectation once again. Because that's what a pure God does, is he removes things that hurt relationships, contaminants. Carefully determine what pleases the Lord. Take no part in the worthless deeds of evil and darkness. He says, instead, expose them. It is a shameful thing even to talk about the things that ungodly people do in secret. But their evil intentions will be exposed when the light shines on them, for light makes everything visible. Is that a heavy passage of Scripture? Is that what you're going to read right before bed, Lord, I prayed this prayer for my children. That's a heavy passage. But I hope that when you received it today, it was in the receiver of a posture of a God looking down, saying, I have the best things in store for you, so abhor these things. Here's a big idea today. Purity is worth fighting for. Let's teach on that. First of all, God creates purity. Number one, God creates purity. So God never calls you to something that he hasn't already placed inside you to produce. So, if God creates purity, how does he create it? Here's some different ideas. First of all, he creates us pure in our bodies. Physically, we are born pure. Another way is he creates us pure in our souls and in our spirits. The inward part, our mind, our will, our emotion, our God factor, he creates that pure. And he also creates purity in relationships. That's what he strives for us to experience. No contamination, pure, unadulterated. So if God creates things pure, and most of us in this room today would quickly identify the fact that we have some impurity in us, or at least we feel we do. Whether it's there or not is a different conversation. But we feel as though that is true. What's the hope? The hope is very simple, and we're going to look at that at the end of the message, that God can restore any impurity that you have in your relationships back to pure once again. Because God doesn't create something and start something on the path and just say, good luck with that. He gives the tools and the resources to restore it, to take it back. Here's some simple statistics just to help us understand this more, and especially in regards in the context of sexual relations for a minute. In our culture today, let's just run some statistics with you guys. What percentage do you think of people on their wedding night are both complete virgins in this society today? 10%. Any other guesses? 3%. In 1950s, right before the sexual awakening of America, what was the percentage of virgins on their wedding night? Both people. Higher? How much higher? 65? 70? 85? 11%. They were just better at hiding it. If there's one thing I can applaud our culture for is we're not playing games anymore. It's not that our human behavior has really changed that drastically from 11% to 3%. Sure, it's a wrong trend. It's not in the right direction, but it hasn't been drastic. Why? Our culture has actually just become more vocal about what they were already doing all along. In other words, there's less guilt and shame about that behavior. %. See, I was raised in the world, in the Christian arena, where any type of sexual indiscretions were preached at all the time. And in the context of our world, not just in church, but our family background was most people in our arena for generations had babies in their teens. That's kind of what our heritage was. And the Bible teaches us about how struggles of fathers are passed down to their children. So I knew I was going to struggle with that. For instance, my parents were 16 and 17 when they were married, and junior and senior in high school, and my sister Kathy was on her way, and that was the reason they got married. Now, just from that, and by the way, that goes back generations, like 4 that we know of, which would definitely take us back into the 50s and beyond. I made it my cause to break that chain. My sisters made it that cause to break that chain. And my parents put us in an environment that was so militaristic in their view of God and so legalistic and so standardistic that there was really, they did everything they could to keep us from that. And so, living in that environment and on that quest, because I was basically tied to, if I didn't do that, then there would be a lot of guilt and shame that I'd deal with in my life. And I didn't want to go before the church and have to tell everybody in the world that I just messed up, because that's how they dealt with it. I pretty much said, I can keep it zipped up and we'll wait. So, on our wedding night, Joy and I experienced each other for the first time. We were both virgins. We were in that 3%. But did you know that because it was so extreme the other way, there were actually a lot of issues that actually kind of came up because we were so uneducated about certain things that even if my mom or dad or somebody would have had a conversation with me and talked a little bit more than the 3-minute birds and bees conversation, it would have helped a lot of things. So guys, God's not saying that you run away and you put yourselves in a bag and you live in a cave, because that's kind of how I was raised. He's not saying that, but what he is saying is, I have the best thing for you. And don't make those choices in your life out of guilt and shame and fear, but because you love God and because God really does have the best things for you, and you don't want to rob yourself of his best. I really do believe that that had a huge impact on helping us stay together after we lost Ellie. As I shared, 83% of folks who lose a child divorce. Ellie's would be, she was born May 17th of 07, so this May she would be 9, which is ridiculous. She passed when she was 2.5, and so all through that. But I will say that there was something magical that kept us together, and it was God's way, and we'll explain that more in a minute, because even though we did it for actually bad reasons, we did wait. Let's continue. Second thing, purity takes work. Psalm 119, this was a verse that I embraced a lot growing up. How can a young man keep his way pure? By guarding it according to your word. With my whole heart I seek you. Let me not wander from your commandments. I have stored up your word in my heart, that I might not sin against you. Simple principles. Guarding your soul, seeking God, staying in his presence. That's what he's saying here. This was a verse that I actually kept on my mirror. I kept it in my heart. I kept it near me because it was a passage to help me when I was a young man. Is it amazing to anybody how accessible sin is in our culture? It's amazing how many things you can see without even trying, just being on the internet, isn't it? Am I out there? Okay. All right, I just want to make sure you guys are on the same internet I'm on, even with filters and blocks and all that stuff. It's amazing. Scrolling through TV channels. It's just, guys, it's everywhere. And it doesn't take much at all to be right in the middle of it. It terrifies me how accessible it is for our little kids. Can I offer you something that's very interesting in my study, getting ready for this message? There is a rise in this culture today of people waiting for their wedding to give up their virginity. Did you know that? There's a resurgence right now. I wonder if it's because not just in the Jesus people stuff, okay? I'm talking about in our culture. I wonder if it's because they've seen it so much and so many things get so fractured that they're finally saying, wow, this is out of control. This can't be the best way. And they're waiting. Here's 3 thoughts on purity takes work. First of all, it's going to take a lot of sacrifice. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take some selflessness. It's going to take some choices. We could spend a lot of time on all those things, but Ephesians 4, once again, let's go back to that. He's begging us to lead a life worthy of your calling, for you have been called by God. Third thing I want us to see quickly is purity produces all these things. We don't have time to expound on them, but boy, this is a whole series within itself. Purity produces, if you wait in your relationships, not just in the marriage, but in relationships, of purity, of removing contamination, of all those things. By the way, what is sin? We talk about sin in church. Let me just clear that up. It's simply mistakes that we make. They're mistakes. And God, the God of heaven, is saying, I don't want you to make a bunch of mistakes. Just like our fathers, as parents, don't want our kids to make mistakes, that's what God is saying, don't do. Because I have great things in store for you. Don't mess up all this stuff. Don't make those choices. That's all that he's talking about. So here's what it produces. By removing those contaminations, you're going to see more fulfillment. You're going to see more meaningful relationships. You're going to experience great trust. You're going to experience hopeful futures. You're going to experience greater intimacy, acceptance, value, love. The greatest one that I know that I've experienced is this chemical that God created in our brains of oxytocin, which bonds people together. It's the feeling of trust. It's the feeling of safety. It's the feeling, it was often referred to as the love hormone. Great amounts of it are released in good, healthy sexual relations. And what it does is it bonds you to your partner at that moment. But here's the cool thing about it. It's not addictive. It has no bad side effects. It's completely healthy. It feels awesome. And it bonds your soul to that person's soul. Do you think it's by chance that the God who's telling us to avoid these things just happened to place in us this great chemical that'll make us want to stay monogamous? Because, guys, is that really, if we didn't have this image of God in us, it doesn't really make sense for the survival of the species for a man and a woman to just stay together. Because for the best of the species, that doesn't make sense. But let me just encourage you about something today. You're greater than an animal. You're a living being, fashioned in the very image of God, with great intentions, with purpose. And with that being, God wants it to bond through another being. And even back in Genesis, the first book, talking about the origin of humanity, he talks about when a man and a woman leave, they come together and cleave. And that idea of cleaving is oneness, it's bonding. And when you take them apart, they don't just come off clean, they come off jagged. This is why divorce is so hard. This is why sexual promiscuity is so hard. But when you do it healthy, it's a beautiful, powerful experience. So this is my hope for you today. I want you to realize this last point, we'll be through. God restores purity. God makes all things new. Last time I spoke, I talked about restoration, how God doesn't just take something and he make it into something else, but he takes back the first and makes it better than it was the first time. That's called restoration. Better than the first. So God makes all things new. That's a principle of the nature of God. So therefore, if that's true with who God is, then there is definitely truth with that in the area of purity. And the second thing that I want you to see is God is a God of second chances. there is great hope. I have seen so many folks who have been in so many different messes and different things come back and say, God, we're going to walk your way, we're going to learn this stuff, we're going to get help, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But they build the healthy boundaries in the relationship, and they start walking in the way that God created it, and they fashion it that way, and they experience great meaning, fulfillment, joy, all those things that I talked about once again. There's great hope. Now, let me say this, though, before we end with this illustration. And I promise you this. There is nothing in this world that God can't restore. The most important restoration that needs to be done is in your own soul and in your own body, in you. But just because you have some wounds and those things, and God can restore it with you, doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to have to work through some hurt human relationships. But God will come alongside and help you with those too. Let me show you how he does that. I have brought my assistant up here with me, who's much more attractive than I, so I wanted to change the scenery here. So what I have here is this sticky roller. Do you have these sticky rollers? I used to have a real big one. I couldn't find the dumb thing, one on the floor. We got it at the stock show back when I was a kid, and it's one of those things that just goes and goes and just gathers up all sorts of stuff. Now, we have 4 dogs and chickens and everything, so hair and mess is a common problem at Amanda Pines, okay, back at the Densmore Ranch. That's what it is. It's who we are. Don't look too closely at my clothes because I'm sure I have dog hair on me somewhere. So, in our lives, Joy, what are some things that our souls bond to in relationships? What are some stuff?
We've got our children. We've got
children.
Pastors, even.
Pastors, okay.
Spouses, parents, mentors who may have taken us down a wrong road. And our souls cling to them. Maybe a very bad, even dating relationship at one time can leave us very scarred. And we don't just cling to them for a time, but we have a tendency to cling to them permanently.
Now, people in relationships, I know that we all have struggles, but is everybody else perfect? Do they have any issues?
I'm sure everybody is.
So really, it's always on our end. No, of course not. We all struggle with stuff. So all of us in relationships, professionally, personally, whatever, are going to bring things, and people are going to cause hurts to each other. Remember in Ephesians where he says, make margin for each other's mistakes? Because it's going to happen. But here's what happens with our souls, is souls, beings, want to bond with other beings. They want to attach themselves. So if all these different things represent different people and different environments in our life, they want to attach themselves to it. But here's the thing. If you attach yourselves to bad contaminants, pretty soon you will feel very bad on the inside. And I'm sure that some of us experience that in our lives. We're addicted to the wrong things. We do the wrong things. We've hurt people, whatever it is. And there comes a place where you're like, Brian, I just feel completely used up. I was counseling this girl with my wife once, and she was just pouring her heart out about all the mess that she's had and all the different boyfriends and the sexual experiences and encounters and all the stuff. And she said that, I just feel completely used up. What do you do with that person? Oh, you bring him to Christ. You bring him to God. You bring him to the one who can only take all the wounds and all the pain, and he can make them clean. Did you know that Jesus, one of the titles of Jesus, or the symbols of who he is he is water of life? The spring of living water? Well, maybe we've heard that in the context of, that's the source of us to have a relationship with God for eternity. But God is far greater than that. Friends, it's greater than that. Now, let me show you what he does. He can take, because he's God, and he's the only one who can, he can take all the mess in our whole world and he can wash it away. Why? Because he's the giver and the sustainer of life. That's who he is. And here's the cool thing about God, is that after you do that and you're made clean once again, did you know that as this dries, what do you think happens again? It regains its stickiness. And the soul is now able to attach itself to souls once again. Now, you may be here today, and you may say, Brian, I'm going to be honest with you. I could use some washing by the Spirit today. I could use a little bit of cleaning up. Well, we're going to provide that opportunity for you today. Or maybe you're here today and you say, Brian, that's awesome. I'm so thankful for that. But, I feel like we're in a healthy place. Well, I encourage you to strive to stay there because you don't know what tomorrow holds. One of my favorite verses in Proverbs says, don't boast about tomorrow because you have no clue what's going to happen. We've made it so far in our 13 and a half years of marriage, but I'm not promising you a month. We're going to do our best. I think tomorrow we're good, but, a month, because it takes stinking work on both parts of sacrifice, of discipline, of all those things to experience the fullness of what God has. So I don't know where you are in your journey today, but Joy and I and Pastor Keith and others, we're here to pray for you, to help you work through and process that. And sometimes it's a great thing just to say, hey, would you come pray with me? Would you pray? I don't really know how to do it, but would you just help me? Because, man, I'd sure like to feel clean again. There's no greater gift we can offer here at 3D Church than for you to leave here today feeling clean with your soul ready to attach once again. Would you pray with me? God in heaven, I would ask that you would work in our hearts and our minds today. Lord, I pray that this is a safe place that we've talked about a lot of things that we just all struggle with in our relationships. I would ask that we have the courage to identify those things and come to you, whether we're scared or uncertain or whatever, but we would come and we would seek your cleansing, your purity, your washing, your life. And Lord, for those people who are in a healthy relationship, not just in their marriage, but with their kids and those other things, I pray that they would come together with their families right now in a time of prayer and circle in and lead in that and say, God, I pray that we will keep fighting for those things and not be tricked to think that it's easy or start coasting, but realize that it's a daily commitment in our journey together forever. And God, I would ask that you would help us to work through that. And Lord, as we have this time of reflection, as folks stand and they can pray where they are, they can come find a place in the front, they can pray with counselors, whatever it is, or with pastors, I pray that right now people would leave here with one goal of feeling clean in you. Lord, thank you that you're the God of purity who restores any uncleanness because your goal is always purity. In your name we pray. Amen.